The stock girl was fired for dropping boxes, and the millionaire saw the label sewn into her clothes, with the same nickname he secretly used for his daughter before she disappeared 19 years ago. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune as Khloe Adams pushed her cart down aisle 7, restocking the shelves with the same mechanical precision she'd perfected over the past 3 years. At 26, she moved through the river market like a ghost, noticed by customers only when they needed help finding something, acknowledged by coworkers mainly when they needed a favor they couldn't ask anyone else for. "Khloe, you're doing it wrong again." Lewis Miller's voice cut through her morning routine like a rusty blade. The store manager stood at the end of the aisle, his arms crossed, that familiar sneer plastered across his face. "Those cereal boxes need to face forward. How many times do I have to tell you?" She looked down at the perfectly aligned boxes, each one facing forward just as they should be. "They are facing forward, Mr. Miller. Don't get smart with me." His voice carried that edge that made her stomach clench. "And that shirt? What the hell is that sewn onto it? This is a professional establishment?" Khloe's hand instinctively moved to the small patch of faded blue fabric stitched carefully onto the sleeve of her work shirt. The fabric was soft from years of washing, its edges frayed, but the delicate embroidered name, Elise, remained visible in pale pink thread. It was the only piece of her real past she had left. It's nothing," she stammered, turning back to her work. "It looks unprofessional. Get rid of it, or find yourself another job." The threat hung in the air as Lewis stalked away, his footsteps echoing against the polished floors. Khloe's fingers traced the precious patch, remembering the day she'd carefully cut it from the larger piece of blanket, the only thing she'd carried with her from Hope House Orphanage when she'd aged out at 18. Hope House. Even thinking the name brought back a flood of memories she usually kept locked away. She'd been 7 when they found her, wandering alone outside a bus station in downtown Chicago, clutching a small baby blanket covered in stars and moons. No memory of how she'd gotten there, no family looking for her, nothing but that blanket and a head full of scattered dreamlike images that never quite made sense. Sister Margaret had been kind, cutting a small piece from the blanket before washing and storing the rest. "So, you'll always have a piece of home with you, dear," she'd said in that gentle voice that had been Khloe's only comfort during those first terrifying weeks. Home. Khloe almost laughed at the irony as she straightened another row of cornflakes. She'd spent 19 years searching for something that might not even exist, but that small patch of fabric had become her anchor, her reminder that somewhere out there, someone had once cared enough to wrap her in something beautiful. She'd sewn pieces of it into every piece of clothing she owned. A sleeve here, a collar there, always close to her heart. Her coworkers thought it was some weird superstition. They had no idea it was the only connection she had to whoever she used to be. "Hey, Khloe." Maria from the deli counter appeared beside her, lowering her voice to a whisper. "I hate to ask, but could you spot me $20? My kids need lunch money, and I don't get paid until Friday." Without hesitation, Khloe reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill, money she'd been saving for new shoes, since her current pair had holes that let in water every time it rained. "Of course. Don't worry about paying me back right away." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "You're an angel. You know that. I don't know how you always manage to help everyone when you barely make enough yourself." Khloe shrugged, focusing on the cereal boxes to hide her own emotions. The truth was, she knew what it felt like to have nothing, to depend on the kindness of others. At the orphanage, the older kids had looked out for her, sharing their snacks and hand-me-down clothes. Now it was her turn to pass that kindness forward, even when her own bank account was running on fumes. The morning dragged on with its usual rhythm of restocking, customer service, and Lewis's periodic inspections designed to find fault with everything she did. By lunch break, Khloe's feet ached, and she found herself in the employee break room, staring at a text message from her landlord about late rent. She was calculating whether she could afford to eat lunch or if she should save the money when her phone buzzed with a news alert. Something about a local businessman visiting stores in his chain. But she barely registered the words. Rich people visiting their own businesses wasn't exactly breaking news in her world. What she didn't know was that 50 miles away, in a glass office overlooking Lake Michigan, Andrew Henderson was staring at the same news alert with a mixture of determination and dread. At 52, he'd built an empire of grocery stores, but he hadn't set foot in any of them in over 2 years. Not since the anniversary breakdowns had become too public, too painful to witness. But the anonymous tips had been piling up about mismanagement at the River Market location, inventory discrepancies, employee complaints, customer service issues. His executive team had assured him they were handling it, but something about this particular store nagged at him. Maybe it was the location, so close to where Elise had disappeared. Maybe it was the fact that he'd been avoiding the painful task of visiting his own businesses for too long. "Sir," his assistant's voice broke through his thoughts. "The car is ready whenever you'd like to leave for the store visit." Andrew nodded, straightening his tie with hands that trembled slightly. He'd made this decision impulsively after the morning board meeting, driven by a combination of business necessity and something he couldn't quite name. For 19 years, he'd searched every corner of Chicago for his daughter, hired the best private investigators money could buy, followed up on thousands of tips and leads, all dead ends. But he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, staying close to the places that reminded him of her was keeping him from moving forward. Maybe facing the River Market, just 20 minutes from Elise's old school, was a step toward healing. As his black sedan pulled away from the Henderson building, Andrew didn't know that he was about to walk into the most important day of his life. And back in the break room of River Market, Khloe Adams finished her meager lunch and returned to work, unconsciously adjusting the small piece of starry fabric on her sleeve, the same fabric that had once covered a 7-year-old girl named Elise Henderson on the last night she'd slept safely in her father's arms. 19 years ago, Veronica Price had always prided herself on being indispensable for 3 years. She'd managed the Henderson household with military precision, every meal perfectly timed, every corner spotless, every detail of little Elise's routine executed flawlessly. She genuinely loved that bright-eyed 7-year-old who would sneak down to the kitchen for midnight cookies and stories. But Andrew Henderson had always made her feel like hired help. Nothing more. Never a thank you that felt sincere. Never acknowledgement of how she'd practically raised his daughter while he buried himself in building his business empire. And then came that awful Tuesday, when he'd found her in his bedroom, slipping his late wife's diamond earrings into her purse. "Pack your things and get out," he'd said, his voice cold as winter. "I'm calling the police if you're not gone in an hour." The humiliation had burned like acid in her chest. Not just the firing, but the way he'd looked at her, like she was dirt beneath his expensive shoes. She'd tried to explain about her mother's medical bills, about the desperation that had driven her to such a stupid mistake. But Andrew Henderson didn't care about poor people's problems. Standing in the unemployment line a week later, Veronica had felt something inside her break. It wasn't just about the job or even the jewelry. It was about watching Andrew Henderson's perfect life, while people like her struggled to survive. He had everything: money, success, a beautiful daughter who adored him, and he'd thrown her away like garbage over a pair of earrings worth less than what he spent on lunch. That's when her brother Ray had found her crying in that dingy diner, plotting her revenge. "You want to hurt him?" Ray had asked, stirring sugar into his coffee with hands that bore the scars of too many bar fights. "Hit him where it counts. Take what he loves most." The plan had been simple. Ray would handle the snatch, grab Elise outside her private school, demand a ransom that would bankrupt the precious Henderson empire. But everything had gone wrong when a patrol car had shown up too early. Spooked by a concerned teacher who'd noticed Ray lurking near the playground, Veronica had waited 3 agonizing hours at the warehouse, listening to sirens wailing in the distance before Ray had called. "I had to dump the kid," he'd gasped into the phone. "Bus station downtown. She's probably still there, but the cops are swarming. I can't go back." She should have called it off then. Should have made an anonymous tip to the police, let them find Elise and return her safely home. But as Veronica had driven toward the bus station, something darker had taken root in her mind. Something that whispered about perfect revenge. She'd found Elise exactly where Ray had left her, a tiny figure huddled on a bench, clutching that ridiculous star-covered blanket, her eyes wide with terror and confusion. The sight should have broken Veronica's heart. Instead, it had crystallized her resolve. "Are you lost, sweetheart?" Veronica had asked, crouching down to the child's level. Elise had nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I want my daddy. Where's my daddy?" And in that moment, Veronica had made a choice that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She'd taken Elise's hand and led her to the car. whispering soothing lies about taking her home. But instead of driving toward the Henderson mansion, she'd headed north to Chicago, to a neighborhood where people minded their own business and didn't ask too many questions. The hardest part had been cutting Elise's beautiful long hair, dyeing it brown, coaching her to forget her real name. The child had cried for days, asking for her daddy, for her room, for everything familiar. But 7-year-olds were remarkably adaptable when survival depended on it. "Your name is Khloe now," Veronica had repeated over and over. "Khloe Adams, you don't have a daddy anymore." Dropping her at Hope House had been almost easy after that. Just another abandoned child in a city full of them. The story she'd told the social workers was simple. She'd found the girl wandering alone, no identification, no family looking for her. It happened more often than people wanted to believe. But Veronica had kept one secret from everyone, including Ray. She'd stayed in Chicago, getting a job at a nearby grocery store, renting a tiny apartment just 6 blocks from the orphanage. And she'd watched Khloe grow up through the chain-link fence of the playground, watched her graduate from Hope House, watched her struggle to make it on her own. It had started as surveillance, making sure her secret stayed buried, but somewhere along the way, it had become something else. Guilt, maybe, or a twisted form of maternal pride. She'd taken photos, always from a distance, always careful, documenting the life she'd stolen and rebuilt. By the time the cancer had started eating away at her lungs 3 years ago, Veronica had filled 2 photo albums with pictures of the girl she'd renamed Khloe Adams. Pictures of school plays, graduation day, her first job interview, a life lived in the shadows of her crime. And when the pain had become too much to bear, when the morphine had loosened her tongue, she'd called her son Louis to her bedside and confessed everything. Present-day Louis Miller finished reading his mother's handwritten confession for the 100th time, carefully folding the pages and slipping them back into the envelope marked, "For Louis. When I'm gone." The photo album sat open on his kitchen table, chronicling 19 years of a stolen life. He'd found them in his mother's closet after the funeral, hidden beneath old clothes and forgotten memories. At first, he'd been horrified. His mother, the woman who'd raised him alone, who'd worked 2 jobs to keep food on their table, had been capable of something so monstrous. But horror had gradually given way to opportunity. Andrew Henderson was worth hundreds of millions. The man had spent a fortune searching for his missing daughter, hiring private investigators, funding missing children's organizations. What would he pay to get her back? What would he pay to keep the truth quiet? Louis had spent 2 years planning. 2 years learning everything he could about both Khloe Adams and Andrew Henderson. He'd gotten himself hired as manager at River Market, specifically because Henderson owned the chain. He'd been feeding anonymous tips to Henderson's corporate office for months, creating just enough concern to guarantee a personal visit. Today was the day. Henderson was coming to the store, and Louis was ready to spring his trap. He had the photos, the confession, and most importantly, he had daily access to the girl who didn't even know her real name. His phone buzzed with a text from corporate security. "Mr. Henderson's convoy departing headquarters now. Ida 15 minutes. Louis smiled as he straightened his tie. 15 minutes until he became the richest man in Chicago. 15 minutes until Andrew Henderson learned that his precious daughter had been working under his nose for 3 years, restocking shelves and living paycheck to paycheck while he'd searched the world for her. The irony was delicious. Henderson Enterprises had been indirectly paying Khloe's wages all along. Minimum wage for the heiress to a grocery empire. Walking back onto the sales floor, Louis spotted Khloe in aisle 12, arranging canned goods with that same careful precision she brought to everything. She had no idea that her entire world was about to explode. No idea that the scruffy piece of fabric she treasured so much was about to reveal the biggest secret in Chicago. He checked his watch. 12 minutes until showtime. The black SUVs pulled into the River Market parking lot like a presidential motorcade, drawing curious stares from customers pushing shopping carts. Andrew Henderson stepped out of the lead vehicle, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the everyday suburban setting. 2 security guards flanked him as he approached the store's automatic doors, their earpieces crackling with quiet communications. Inside, Louis Miller felt his pulse quicken. He'd positioned himself near the customer service desk with a clear view of the entrance, watching as Henderson's polished shoes crossed the threshold of his store for the first time in years. The man looked older than his photos, gray threading through his dark hair. but his presence still commanded attention. "Mr. Henderson, welcome to River Market," Louis said, stepping forward with practiced deference. "I'm Louis Miller, the store manager. We weren't expecting—" "That's the point." Andrew cut him off, his eyes already scanning the store layout. "Anonymous complaints about operations here. I want to see what's really going on." Khloe, oblivious to the commotion near the front entrance, continued her work in aisle 5. She'd moved on to the glass jars section. Pasta sauces, pickles, olives, each container requiring careful handling. The morning rush was over, leaving the store quieter. But she knew the lunch crowd would hit soon. She reached for a case of marinara sauce on the top shelf of her cart, stretching to place it properly. The box was heavier than expected, and as she adjusted her grip, her foot caught on the cart's wheel lock. Time seemed to slow as Khloe felt herself falling backward. The case of glass jars tumbled from her hands, and she crashed into the display behind her. A carefully constructed pyramid of premium pasta sauce that had taken her an hour to build that morning. The sound was catastrophic. Glass exploded across the linoleum floor in a symphony of shattering red sauce splashing like abstract art across the white shelves. Khloe landed hard on her side, her work shirt catching on a broken piece of shelving and tearing with a sharp ripping sound. Every head in the store turned toward the chaos. Conversations stopped, children pointed, and Louis Miller saw his moment. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Louis's voice boomed across the store as he charged toward aisle 5, making sure his outrage was visible to everyone, especially Andrew Henderson. "Look at this mess. Do you have any idea how much this is going to cost?" Khloe struggled to sit up, her hands shaking as she surveyed the destruction around her. Glass crunched under her movements, and she could feel the sticky warmth of pasta sauce soaking through her torn shirt. "I'm sorry, Mr. Miller. I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean—" Louis grabbed her arm roughly, hauling her to her feet in front of the growing crowd of onlookers. "This is thousands of dollars in damaged inventory. And look at you. You're a disaster." But as Khloe stood, her torn shirt gaped open at the shoulder, revealing two things that made Andrew Henderson's world stop spinning. First, there was the patch of faded blue fabric sewn carefully into her sleeve. Fabric covered in tiny embroidered stars and moons. Fabric that Andrew recognized with the same certainty most people recognize their own heartbeat. Second, visible through the tear in her shirt, was a small birthmark on her shoulder. Not just any birthmark, but one shaped distinctly like a star. A mark Andrew had kissed goodnight thousands of times, had traced with gentle fingers during bedtime stories, had worried over during doctor visits when Elise was a toddler. The glass jar Andrew had been absently holding slipped from his numbed fingers, adding its crash to the chaos. His security team immediately moved closer, but he barely noticed. His vision tunneled, focusing entirely on the young woman standing amid the wreckage, her face flushed with humiliation. "Get up! Clean this mess!" Louis continued his performance, but his voice seemed to come from underwater. Andrew's ears were ringing, his chest constricting as if someone had wrapped steel bands around his lungs. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. But that birthmark, God, that perfect little star that his wife had called Elise's lucky star when she was born, was exactly where it should be. And the fabric. Elise. The name escaped his lips as barely more than a whisper. Khloe looked up from where she was kneeling, trying to gather the larger pieces of glass. "I'm sorry, sir. What did you say?" Andrew's legs felt like they might give out. He gripped the nearest shelf for support, his knuckles white. The fabric on your shirt, where did you get it?" The question seemed to come from nowhere, especially given the chaos around them. Khloe's hand instinctively moved to cover the precious patch, protective and confused. It's nothing important." "Where did you get it?" Andrew repeated, his voice stronger now but carrying an edge of desperation that made everyone in the aisle uncomfortable. Louis watched the exchange with growing excitement. This was better than he'd planned. Henderson had noticed the clues without any prompting. The old man was practically vibrating with recognition. "Answer him," Louis demanded, though for once his harshness served Andrew's purpose rather than his own cruelty. Khloe looked between the two men, bewildered by the sudden intensity focused on her patch. I've had it since I was little. It's from a blanket. The only thing I had when—" She trailed off, not wanting to admit her orphan status to her boss's boss. "When what?" Andrew stepped closer. his security team hanging back but alert. "Please, this is important." The kindness in his voice was so different from Lewis's anger that Khloe found herself answering honestly. "When they found me? At the bus station. I was 7, and I had this baby blanket, and the nuns at Hope House let me keep a piece of it." Her fingers traced the worn fabric. "It's all I have from before." Andrew's world tilted completely off its axis. Hope House. He knew that orphanage. He'd visited it 6 times during his searches. Shown Elise's photo to every staff member. Followed up on every lead. But they'd been looking for a girl named Elise Henderson with long blonde hair, not a brunette named Khloe Adams. "The birthmark," he said, his voice barely controlled. "How long have you had it?" Chloe's free hand moved automatically to her shoulder, covering the star-shaped mark. "Since birth, I guess. I don't really remember. It's shaped like a star." It wasn't a question. Khloe stared at him, unnerved by how this stranger seemed to know intimate details about her body. "How did you—" Andrew's phone was already in his hand, fingers trembling as he scrolled through his photos. The picture he found was 19 years old. A little blonde girl in a bathtub, laughing as bubbles covered her shoulders, her star-shaped birthmark clearly visible. He held the phone out with shaking hands. "Is this you?" Khloe took the phone, squinting at the old digital photo. The little girl in the picture looked nothing like her. Wrong hair color. Obviously wealthy background. Clearly loved and cared for. But something about the eyes, the shape of the face. "I don't understand," she whispered. Andrew's security chief was already on his radio, calling for immediate privacy and crowd control. Louis Miller stood frozen, watching his carefully planned extortion unfold into something far more complex and dangerous than he'd anticipated. And in the middle of aisle 5, surrounded by broken glass and marinara sauce, a 26-year-old orphan named Khloe Adams stared at a photo of herself as a child, while Andrew Henderson fought to stay conscious, as 19 years of searching crashed into the most impossible moment of his life. The store had been cleared. Andrew's security team worked with quiet efficiency, escorting curious customers to the exit and posting guards at every entrance. Within 20 minutes, River Market had transformed from a bustling grocery store into something resembling a crime scene, complete with the eerie silence that follows catastrophe. Khloe sat on a folding chair someone had brought from the break room, still clutching Andrew's phone. The photo of the blonde little girl seemed to mock her. This couldn't be her life. This couldn't be real. She was Khloe Adams, the girl nobody wanted, the one who'd aged out of foster care with nothing but a high school diploma and a piece of fabric. "I need to call someone," she said to no one in particular. "My supervisor, or I should clean up the mess. Mr. Miller's going to fire me for sure now." "Nobody's getting fired." Andrew's voice was steadier now, though his hands still trembled slightly. He'd been making phone calls for the past 10 minutes. His lawyer, his doctor, someone about DNA testing. The words felt surreal floating through the empty store. Louis Miller had been unusually quiet during the chaos, standing near the pharmacy section with his arms crossed, watching everything unfold with an expression that was hard to read. But as Andrew finished his latest call, Louis stepped forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well," Louis said, his voice carrying a tone of casual amusement that made everyone turn toward him. "This is quite the coincidence, isn't it?" Andrew's security chief, a former FBI agent named Marcus, immediately shifted position to keep Louis in his line of sight. There was something about the store manager's demeanor that had been setting off alarm bells since they'd arrived. "What do you mean?" Andrew asked. Louis reached into his jacket pocket, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid spooking the security team. He pulled out a manila envelope, thick with papers and photographs. "I mean, it's funny how life works out sometimes. 26 years old, found at a bus station, orphaned with just a baby blanket." He opened the envelope, revealing the edge of what looked like surveillance photos. "Some might call it fate." The blood drained from Andrew's face. "What are you talking about?" "My mother was a very thorough woman," Louis continued, his voice taking on a sing-song quality that made Chloe's skin crawl. "Veronica Price. Maybe you remember her. Used to work for you. Oh, about 19 years ago." The name hit Andrew like a physical blow. Veronica Price, the governess he'd fired a week before Elise disappeared, the woman who'd been stealing from them, who'd left in a rage, making threats about how he'd regret treating her like garbage. She kept very detailed records, Louis said, pulling several photographs from the envelope. They were surveillance shots. A young girl walking to school, a teenager in a graduation cap, a woman in a grocery store uniform, all clearly taken without the subject's knowledge, all unmistakably Khloe at different ages. Khloe stood up so fast her chair toppled backward. "Those are pictures of me. How do you have pictures of me?" "My mother was many things, but she wasn't careless." Louis spread the photos on the nearest checkout counter like he was dealing cards. "She documented everything. Every school you attended, every job you worked, every birthday you celebrated at that orphanage." He looked up at Andrew with undisguised malice. She wanted to make sure her insurance policy stayed valuable. Andrew's security team had closed in around Louis now, but the man seemed completely unconcerned. If anything, he appeared to be enjoying himself. "Insurance policy." Marcus, the security chief, spoke for the first time since the store had been cleared. "Oh, come now," Louis laughed. "Surely you've figured it out by now. My mother orchestrated the whole thing, the kidnapping, the disappearance, all of it. She took little Elise Henderson and turned her into Khloe Adams as the perfect revenge against the man who humiliated her." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Khloe made a small sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a sob, and sank back into her chair. Andrew's face had gone completely white. "She's dead now, my mother," Louis continued conversationally. "Cancer got her 3 years ago, but on her deathbed, she told me everything, every detail. Even gave me these photos and a full written confession." He pulled more papers from the envelope. "Very thorough, like I said. Why are you telling us this?" Andrew's voice was barely above a whisper. Louis' smile widened. "Because, Mr. Henderson, you're going to pay me $50 million to keep this information private." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to stop humming. $50 million. Marcus stepped forward, his hand moving instinctively toward his concealed weapon. "It's really quite reasonable," Louis said, completely unperturbed by the intimidation. "Consider what you've spent searching for her over the years. Consider what this story would be worth to the media. Billionaire's daughter found working minimum wage in his own store, kidnapped by vengeful employee. The headlines write themselves." Khloe was shaking now, her whole body trembling as the implications crashed over her. "This isn't real. This can't be real." "Oh, it's real, sweetheart." Louis turned his attention to her with mock sympathy. "You've been living a lie your entire life. Your real name is Elise Henderson. That man over there is your father, and you've been working for the family business without even knowing it." He laughed at his own joke. "The irony is just delicious." Andrew found his voice, though it came out rough and strangled. "If what you're saying is true, it is true. I have the confession, the photos, the timeline, everything you need to verify it." Louis tapped the envelope. "But verification comes at a price, $50 million, transferred to an offshore account, and all of this stays between us. Your family reunion stays private, and the world never learns how spectacularly you failed to protect your own daughter." The cruelty in his voice made Khloe flinch. This man she'd worked under for 3 years, who'd made her life miserable with his constant criticism and unreasonable demands, had known her true identity the entire time, had been planning this moment, watching her struggle to pay rent and buy food, all while sitting on information that could have changed everything. "And if I refuse?" Andrew asked. Louis shrugged. "Then tomorrow morning, every news outlet in Chicago gets copies of everything. Photos of your daughter restocking shelves, living in poverty while you search the globe. The story of how a fired domestic worker pulled off the perfect revenge, and how the great Andrew Henderson never thought to look in his own backyard." Marcus whispered something into his earpiece, and Andrew caught the words "recording equipment" and "legal authorization." But Louis seemed oblivious to the security measures being put in place around him. "You have 24 hours to decide," Louis continued. "The money or the media circus, either way, I win." He started gathering his photos back into the envelope. "But I'd choose quickly if I were you. These kinds of stories have a way of leaking, and the longer you wait, the less control you'll have over the narrative." Khloe stood up again, this time steadier. "What gives you the right?" Her voice was quiet, but filled with a rage that surprised everyone, including herself. "What gives you the right to use my life as a bargaining chip?" Louis looked at her with the same dismissive expression he'd worn for 3 years. "Sweetie, You don't have a life. You have the life my mother created for you, and now it's time for that life to pay dividends." But as he spoke, Lewis didn't notice the small red light blinking on the security camera that Marcus had discreetly repositioned 15 minutes earlier, didn't see Andrew's slight nod to his security chief, or the way Marcus's fingers moved across his phone screen, activating recording systems that had been installed throughout the store weeks ago. The trap was closing, but not around the person Lewis Miller expected. Andrew Henderson straightened his tie and looked Lewis Miller directly in the eye. For the first time since the conversation began, he smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. $50 million is a lot of money, Andrew said quietly. But you know what's interesting, Mr. Miller? I didn't become successful by making hasty decisions under pressure. Lewis's confident smirk faltered slightly. You don't exactly have time to deliberate. Actually, I do. Andrew gestured to Marcus, who stepped forward with a tablet in his hands. You see, those anonymous complaints about this store, the ones that brought me here today, they were very convenient. Almost too convenient. The color began draining from Lewis's face. So 3 weeks ago, I had my security team install some additional equipment. Andrew took the tablet from Marcus and turned it toward Lewis. On the screen, they could see a perfect view of the current scene. Louis spreading photographs across the checkout counter, his voice clear as crystal through hidden microphones. Everything you've said in the last 20 minutes has been recorded in high definition, Marcus added, his FBI training evident in his calm. Methodical delivery, including your detailed confession to extortion, conspiracy, and accessory after the fact to kidnapping. Louis' envelope slipped from his suddenly numb fingers, photographs scattering across the linoleum floor. You can't. That's entrapment. No, said a new voice from the store's entrance. That's evidence. Detective Sarah Chen of the Chicago Police Department walked through the doors, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. She'd been waiting in the parking lot for the past 10 minutes, listening to the live audio feed from Marcus's equipment. Lewis Miller, you're under arrest for attempted extortion and conspiracy in connection with the 2005 kidnapping of Elise Henderson. Detective Chen's voice carried the weight of 19 years of cold case files. You have the right to remain silent. But Lewis wasn't listening to his Miranda rights. His eyes darted frantically around the store, looking for an exit that wasn't blocked by law enforcement. This is insane. I'm the victim here. My mother confessed on her deathbed. I'm just trying to reunite a family. By demanding $50 million, Detective Chen continued cuffing him with practiced efficiency. That's an interesting definition of family reunion. As the officers led Louis toward the exit, he twisted around to shout back at Andrew. You think this is over? I know things. The diary, the locations, everything my mother documented. The diary that you've been concealing from authorities for 3 years. Detective Chen's voice cut through his protests. The one that contained information that could have solved a kidnapping case. Yeah, we're going to want to talk about that too. The store fell silent, except for the sound of police radios and departing footsteps. Khloe sat frozen in her chair, watching her boss, her tormentor for 3 years, being dragged away in handcuffs. The surreal nature of the morning was beginning to overwhelm her. I don't understand any of this, she whispered, looking up at Andrew. This morning I was worried about paying rent, and now, Andrew knelt beside her chair, careful to stay at a respectful distance, up close. The resemblance was undeniable. The shape of her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw when she was upset, features he'd memorized from 1,000 bedtime stories and scraped knee comfort sessions. I know this is overwhelming, he said softly. I know you have no reason to trust me, or believe any of this, but Khloe, he caught himself. I'm sorry, what would you like me to call you? The simple question, asked with such genuine care, brought tears to her eyes. When was the last time anyone had asked what she wanted, what she preferred, what would make her more comfortable? I've been Khloe for 19 years, she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't know how to be anyone else. You don't have to be anyone else. We need to figure out what happened, what was done to both of us. Andrew's voice caught slightly. If you're willing, there are tests we can run, DNA tests that will tell us for certain whether... He couldn't finish the sentence. 19 years of hoping, searching, following false leads, and watching them crumble to dust. The possibility that this was another cruel coincidence was almost too devastating to consider. Detective Chen approached them, having finished with Lewis's arrest. "Mr. Henderson, Miss Adams, I'm going to need statements from both of you. But first, I think you should know. We've been through Mr. Miller's mother's apartment. The amount of documentation she kept is extensive." She opened a file folder, revealing photocopied pages covered in meticulous handwriting. Veronica Price kept detailed records of every aspect of the kidnapping and its aftermath. School enrollment forms, medical records, even birthday cards she never sent. It's like she was documenting a life she felt responsible for, but couldn't bring herself to fully abandon. Khloe leaned forward to look at the papers. Her own face stared back at her from school photos she didn't remember posing for. Report cards from elementary schools she barely remembered attending. She followed me my entire life. The violation felt almost as profound as the kidnapping itself. According to these records, she never made direct contact with you after dropping you at Hope House, Detective Chen continued. But she knew where you were at all times, your addresses, your jobs, even your medical appointments. Andrew studied the papers with growing horror. She was watching, but she never tried to contact me, never tried to return Elise. This was purely about punishment. From what we can piece together, yes, Veronica Price felt so humiliated by her dismissal that she wanted you to suffer the way she had, losing a child, living with uncertainty, never having closure. Detective Chen's voice carried professional sympathy. It was a crime of revenge that lasted 19 years. Khloe stood up abruptly. Pacing to the window that looked out over the parking lot, police cars lined the lot now, their red and blue lights painting everything in harsh, alternating colors. "So what happens now?" she asked without turning around. "I mean, assuming the DNA test proves what everyone seems to think it will prove, what happens to me?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications neither Andrew nor Khloe were ready to fully confront. They were strangers who might be family, a father and daughter separated by crime and reunited by accident, a billionaire and a minimum wage worker who shared nothing but possibly DNA and a lifetime of grief. "Nothing has to change," Andrew said carefully. "I mean, everything has changed, but you're an adult. You have your own life, your own choices. I'm not trying to reclaim anything or force anything, He struggled for words. "I just want to know if you're safe, if you're okay, if there's anything you need." Khloe turned back from the window, studying his face. "And if I am your daughter, what then?" Andrew's answer came without hesitation. "Then I spend the rest of my life trying to make up for failing to protect you in the first place." Detective Chen cleared her throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should start with the DNA test and take everything else one step at a time." Marcus approached with a small kit in his hands. "I can arrange for the test to be expedited. Results in 24 hours instead of the usual week." Khloe looked at the kit, then at Andrew, then at the chaos of broken glass and marinara sauce that still littered aisle 5. This morning she'd been worried about Louis firing her over the accident. Now Louis was in jail, and she might be the heir to a grocery empire. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's find out who I really am." 24 hours could feel like a lifetime when everything you believed about yourself hung in the balance. Khloe had barely slept, lying in her tiny studio apartment staring at the ceiling. Replaying every moment from the store, the patch of fabric on her nightstand seemed to glow in the darkness. No longer just a keepsake from a forgotten past, but possibly the key to everything. Andrew hadn't slept either. He'd spent the night in his study, surrounded by 19 years of search files, private investigator reports, and photographs of age-progressed images of what Elise might look like as an adult. None of them had come close to capturing Khloe's face, but now he could see Elise in every expression, every gesture he'd observed during their brief time together. At 10:47 a.m., Dr. Patricia Martinez from the lab called Andrew's cell phone directly. "Mr. Henderson, this is Dr. Martinez from Genetech Labs. I have your results." Andrew's hand tightened on the phone. He was sitting in his car outside Khloe's apartment building, having arrived 20 minutes early for their agreed meeting time. "And the probability of paternity is 99,97%, sir. She's definitely your daughter." The words hit him like a physical force. Andrew doubled over in the driver's seat, pressing his forehead against the steering wheel, as 19 years of grief, hope, and desperate searching crashed over him in waves. Elise was alive. His daughter was alive. "Sir, are you there?" "Yes," he managed. "Thank you, doctor. Thank you." He sat in the car for another 10 minutes, trying to compose himself before walking into the building. Khloe was waiting for him in the lobby, looking pale and nervous, wearing the same jeans and sweater she'd had on yesterday. She'd tried to cover the tear in her work shirt, but traces of marinara sauce still stained the fabric. The results came in. Andrew said simply. Khloe's face went completely white. "And you're my daughter." The words hung between them in the small lobby, surrounded by the everyday sounds of a city apartment building. Traffic outside, a television playing somewhere upstairs, the hum of fluorescent lighting. Such an ordinary setting for the most extraordinary moment of both their lives. Khloe sat down heavily on the lobby's single bench. "I don't know how to feel about this." Andrew sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. "I don't either." They sat in silence for several minutes, two strangers processing the fact that they were family. Finally, Khloe spoke. "I keep waiting for someone to tell me this is all a mistake, that I'm still just Khloe Adams who can't afford to fix her car and eats ramen noodles for dinner 3 nights a week." She looked at him sideways. "What happens now?" "I was hoping," Andrew said carefully, "that you might come see the house, your house. Everything is exactly the way it was." The invitation terrified and intrigued her in equal measure. "You kept my room." "I kept everything." An hour later, Khloe found herself in the passenger seat of Andrew's sedan, driving through neighborhoods that grew progressively more affluent as they moved away from the city center. She'd never been this far north, never seen houses this large, never imagined that somewhere in one of them was a room that had once been hers. The Henderson estate sat on 3 acres of manicured lawn. The house itself, a sprawling Tudor-style mansion that looked like something from a movie. As they pulled into the circular driveway, Khloe felt a strange stirring in her chest. Not quite memory, but something deeper, familiarity maybe. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Your mother designed most of it," Andrew said, his voice soft with old grief. "She died when you were 3. Cancer." Another piece of a puzzle Khloe hadn't known she was missing. A mother she couldn't remember, a life she'd been stolen from before she was old enough to understand what she'd lost. The front door opened to reveal a foyer that belonged in a museum. Marble floors, crystal chandelier, a sweeping staircase that curved up to the 2nd floor. But what caught Khloe's attention was the wall of photographs, hundreds of them, chronicling a little blonde girl's life from birth to age 7. "Oh my God," she breathed, moving closer to study the pictures. A baby in a pink blanket covered with stars and moons, the same fabric now sewn into her clothes. A toddler taking her first steps. A little girl blowing out candles on birthday cakes, opening Christmas presents, playing in the garden. "You were so loved," Andrew said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every day, every moment, your mother and I, we couldn't imagine life without you." Khloe's eyes filled with tears as she studied a photo of herself at maybe 4 years old. Sitting on Andrew's lap while he read her a bedtime story, she could see the love in his face, the gentle way he held her, the complete devotion of a father to his child. "I don't remember any of this," she said. "You were so young when everything changed. 7 is old enough to have memories, but trauma can bury them pretty deep." They climbed the staircase together, Andrew's hand hovering near her elbow in case she needed support. At the top, he led her down a hallway lined with more photographs until they reached a door painted soft lavender. "This is it," he said simply. Andrew opened the door, and Khloe stepped into a perfectly preserved shrine to childhood. The room was exactly as a 7-year-old had left it. Toys scattered on the floor as if she'd been called away mid-game, books open on the reading chair, even a half-finished puzzle on the small table by the window. But it was the walls that made Khloe gasp. They were covered in the same star and moon pattern as her precious fabric. But here the colors were vibrant and new, not faded by years of washing and wear. "The blanket," she whispered. "Your mother made that room for you when you were born," Andrew said from the doorway. "She said every little girl needed to sleep under the stars." Khloe moved through the room like a sleepwalker, touching objects that felt familiar in ways she couldn't explain. A stuffed elephant that fit perfectly in her hands, a jewelry box that played a melody that made her heart ache with nameless longing. And then she saw it, sitting on the bed, carefully preserved under glass, the other half of her blanket. You kept it. I couldn't bear to put it away. Some nights, when the searching got too hard, I'd come in here and hold it and try to remember what it felt like when you were safe. Khloe lifted the glass cover with trembling hands and touched the fabric. It was exactly the same pattern, the same texture, even the same slight wear along the edges where tiny fingers had rubbed it for comfort. As her fingers traced the embroidered stars, something shifted in her mind, a flash of memory. Being tucked into bed, a gentle voice singing softly, the feeling of being completely, utterly safe. "Sleep well, my little Elise," she whispered, the words coming from somewhere deep in her subconscious. Andrew's sharp intake of breath made her look up. "You remember that? Did you used to say that when you tucked me in? Every night?" His voice was barely audible. Every single night. More fragments began surfacing. The smell of his cologne, the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, the way he'd sit on the edge of her bed and tell her stories about brave princesses and magical kingdoms where no one was ever really lost. "There's more," she said suddenly. There was a song, something about mockingbirds." Andrew's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down his face as he began to sing, his voice rough with emotion. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Papa's gonna buy you a mockingbird." The melody unlocked something fundamental in Khloe's mind. Suddenly, she was 4 years old again, safe in her father's arms, listening to his voice chase away the monsters under the bed, and promise that tomorrow would bring new adventures. "Daddy!" The word slipped out before she could stop it. 19 years of lost childhood compressed into a single, broken syllable. Andrew crossed the room in 3 strides and wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as they both wept for all the years they'd lost, all the bedtime stories unread, all the birthdays uncelebrated, all the moments that could never be recovered but might, somehow, be forgiven. They stayed in Elise's room until the sun began to set, father and daughter rediscovering each other through shared tears and recovered fragments of the past. Andrew had sent his housekeeper away for the evening, wanting this reunion to be private, sacred, just the two of them, and 19 years of missing pieces slowly finding their way back together. Khloe sat cross-legged on the bed, the original blanket spread across her lap, while Andrew settled into the small reading chair that had once been perfectly sized for bedtime stories. Between them lay open photo albums, each page a window into a life she was slowly remembering. "Tell me about this one," Khloe said, pointing to a picture of herself at maybe 5 years old, covered in finger paint and grinning wildly. Andrew's face softened with the memory. "That was your art phase. You decided you were going to paint a mural on your bedroom wall. This wall, actually. And you got about 3 handprints in before I found you." He gestured to a spot near the window, where faint traces of blue paint were still visible beneath layers of wallpaper. "You cried for an hour because I wouldn't let you finish it. Did you ever let me paint the wall?" "Eventually. See that corner over there?" He pointed to a section near the closet where the wallpaper was slightly different. 6 months later, for your 6th birthday, I had professional painters help you create a proper mural. It was there until you were 7. The memory came flooding back, standing on a stepladder, her small hand guided by a patient artist, painting her own version of the night sky to match her beloved blanket. The pride she'd felt when it was finished, the way she'd dragged every visitor to her room to see her masterpiece. "I remember," she whispered. "I remember being so proud of it. I thought I was the best artist in the world." "You were. You are." Andrew's voice carried all the conviction of a father who'd kept his daughter's childhood artwork in frames throughout the house. "Your paintings are still hanging in my office." Khloe turned the page to find photos from what looked like a camping trip. A younger Andrew helping a tiny Elise roast marshmallows over a campfire. Both of them wearing matching flannel shirts and enormous smiles. "You took me camping. Every summer you insisted on it after reading some book about kids who lived in the wilderness. You'd pack your little backpack weeks in advance, making lists of everything we'd need to survive in the forest." His laugh was tinged with bittersweet memory. "Of course, we usually camped about 50 feet from the car, and you'd want to go home as soon as it got dark. But you did it anyway. Every year, even that last summer, just a few months before." He couldn't finish the sentence. Khloe studied his face, seeing not the intimidating businessman from the store, but a man who'd been broken by loss and was slowly allowing himself to hope again. What was I like? Really like? I mean, not just the cute photo album version. Andrew leaned back in the reading chair, his eyes distant as he sorted through memories he'd kept locked away for so long. You were fearless. Absolutely fearless. You'd climb anything, try anything, ask a million questions about everything. Your favorite word was why. You must have asked me why the sky was blue about 1,000 times. And you answered every time, even when I didn't know the answer. We'd look it up together. You had this little notebook where you'd write down all the interesting facts you learned. I think it's still in your desk drawer. Khloe slipped off the bed and walked to the small white desk by the window. The drawers opened easily, revealing treasures from a 7-year-old's world. Crayons, stickers, hair ribbons, and sure enough, a small purple notebook filled with careful printing. Why is grass green? She read aloud from the first page. Because of something called chlorophyll. It's like the grass's way of eating sunshine. She looked up at Andrew with wonder. I wrote this. You were obsessed with that notebook for months. You'd interview everyone who came to the house. The mailman, the gardener, me, anyone who'd answer your questions. You said you were going to be a scientist when you grew up and discover all the whys in the world. Flipping through the pages, Khloe found dozens of questions and carefully written answers. Why do birds fly? Why does ice cream melt? Why do people cry when they're happy? Each entry was a glimpse into the curious, eager mind of the child she'd been. But it was the last entry that made her breath catch. Why do bad things happen to good people? Daddy says sometimes the world is unfair. But that doesn't mean we stop being good. Being good is how we make the world better. I remember writing this, she said softly. I was upset about something. A story on the news. There was a house fire in our neighborhood. A family lost everything, including their dog. You couldn't understand why such terrible things could happen to people who hadn't done anything wrong. Andrew's voice was gentle. You were so young, but you already had such a strong sense of justice. Khloe closed the notebook and held it against her chest. That feeling never went away. At the orphanage, at work, I always felt like I had to help people, like I had to make things fair somehow. It's who you are, who you've always been. Andrew stood and walked to the bookshelf, running his fingers along the spines of children's books. Even at 3 and 4 years old, you'd share your toys with kids who didn't have any. You'd give away your Halloween candy to children whose parents couldn't afford to buy them costumes. He pulled a book from the shelf, a worn copy of The Giving Tree, and opened it to the first page where Property of Elise Henderson was written in careful block letters. This was your favorite, he said, sitting back down. You made me read it so many times I had it memorized. You said you wanted to be like the tree, always helping others even if it meant giving up parts of yourself. The memory of that story hit Khloe like a wave. She could see herself curled up in Andrew's lap in this very chair, following along with the pictures as he read about the tree who loved the little boy so much she gave him everything she had. You used to cry at the end, Andrew continued. Not because the tree was just a stump, but because you thought the boy should have taken better care of her. You said the tree deserved someone who would love her back. I still feel that way, Khloe admitted. About a lot of things. As the room grew darker, Andrew turned on the bedside lamp, a cheerful thing shaped like a crescent moon that cast star-shaped shadows on the walls. The familiar pattern of light and shadow triggered another cascade of memories. Story time after dinner, quiet conversations about her day at school, the feeling of being absolutely, completely loved. The night it happened, she said suddenly. Do you remember the last thing you said to me? Andrew's face tightened with old pain. I tucked you in, just like always. You'd had a bad dream the night before, so I stayed a little longer, singing until you fell asleep. The last thing I said was, his voice broke, sleep well, my little Elise. Daddy will keep you safe. The promise that had been broken hung between them, heavy with guilt and grief that belonged to neither of them, but had shaped both their lives. It wasn't your fault, Khloe said firmly. Whatever happened, whatever Veronica did, it wasn't your fault. You couldn't have known. I should have protected you better, should have seen the signs, should have... You loved me. That's what I remember most clearly now. Not the fear, not the confusion, but feeling completely loved and safe. That's what I carried with me, even when I didn't know where it came from. Andrew reached for her hand, and she let him take it. "Can you forgive me for not finding you sooner?" Khloe squeezed his fingers, looking around the room that had been preserved like a shrine to hope. "There's nothing to forgive. Dad, you never stopped looking. You never stopped loving me. And somehow we found each other anyway." As if drawn by invisible threads, they both looked at the blanket spread across the bed, the two halves that had been separated for 19 years, now lying side by side, the star patterns aligning perfectly despite decades apart. The next morning brought a clarity that neither Andrew nor Khloe had felt in years. They'd spent the night talking until dawn, sharing 19 years of separate lives, slowly weaving together the threads of who they'd been and who they'd become. Now, in the gentle light of early morning streaming through the kitchen windows, they sat across from each other at the breakfast table where Elise had once eaten countless bowls of cereal and argued about why vegetables were necessary. "I keep expecting to wake up," Khloe said, cupping her hands around a mug of coffee. "This feels too good to be real." Andrew smiled, and she could see it was the first genuine smile he'd worn in years. "I know what you mean. I've had so many dreams like this, so many false hopes, that part of me is afraid to believe it. But you do believe it." "I do." He reached across the table and touched the patch of fabric on her sleeve. "This little piece of evidence that you carried with you all these years. It's like you were holding on to us, even when you didn't know what us meant." Khloe looked down at the worn fabric, then back at Andrew. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Anything. What do you expect from me? I mean, I'm 26 years old. I've lived my entire conscious life as a different person. I don't know how to be your daughter, and I don't know if I can live up to whatever version of Elise you've been holding on to." Andrew was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. "I don't expect you to be 7 years old again. I don't expect you to magically turn into the person you might have been if this had never happened. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "I just want to know you, the person you are now, the person you became despite everything. And I want you to know that you have a family, a place where you belong, if you want it. And if I want to keep being Khloe Adams, then you're Khloe Adams. Names don't change who you are inside," he smiled. "Though legally, we should probably get your identity sorted out. You have inheritance rights, access to accounts that have been waiting for you, but none of that matters if you're not ready for it." Khloe stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the garden where she could see the ghost of her childhood in every carefully maintained flower bed. "I want to do something first, something symbolic. What did you have in mind?" "The blanket. I want to put it back together." An hour later, they were back in Elise's room with a sewing kit that Andrew's housekeeper had provided. The two halves of the blanket lay spread across the bed, and for the first time in 19 years, the full pattern was visible. A beautiful night sky covered in embroidered stars and moons, each stitch made with love by a mother who'd dreamed of her daughter sleeping safely under the stars. "Your mother spent months making this," Andrew said, running his fingers along the delicate embroidery. "She started it before you were born, working on it every evening while she waited for you to arrive." Khloe picked up the piece she'd carried for 19 years, examining the edges where she'd carefully cut it from the larger blanket. "I was so afraid of losing this. There were times when I had to choose between buying food and paying to have it properly cleaned and mended. I always chose the blanket. It was all you had of home. It was home." She positioned her piece against the larger section, and the edges aligned perfectly, as if they'd been waiting all these years to be reunited. "Look at that. After all this time, after all the washing and wearing, it still fits exactly." Together, they began the delicate process of reuniting the fabric. Andrew held the pieces steady, while Khloe worked with needle and thread, her movements careful and reverent. Each stitch was a bridge across 19 years of separation, a symbol of healing and restoration. "There's something I need to tell you," Khloe said as she worked. "About the name, Khloe Adams. You don't have to explain anything. I want to. When I aged out of Hope House, I had to choose whether to keep searching for my birth family or build a new life as Khloe Adams. I chose Khloe because it means young green shoot, something that grows new life from ground that seemed barren, and Adams because it felt like a new beginning." Andrew's eyes filled with tears. You gave yourself a name that meant hope. I didn't want to be defined by what I'd lost. I wanted to be defined by what I could become." She paused in her stitching to look at him. "But now I understand that I was never really lost. Part of me always knew I belonged somewhere." As the afternoon wore on, the blanket slowly became whole again. With each stitch, Khloe found herself remembering more. Fragments of lullabies, the texture of her mother's hair, the sound of Andrew's laughter echoing through the house. The memories weren't painful anymore. They were gifts. Pieces of herself she thought were gone forever. "There," she said finally, holding up the completed blanket. "It's whole again." Andrew took one end while she held the other, and they spread it between them. The repair was visible if you looked closely, a thin line of newer thread running through the star pattern, but it didn't detract from the beauty. If anything, it added to it, like a scar that tells the story of survival. "It's perfect," Andrew said, "just like you. I'm not perfect, I'm damaged and confused, and I still don't know how to process any of this. Perfect doesn't mean undamaged. Perfect means exactly as you're supposed to be." He folded his end of the blanket and moved closer to her. "Khloe, I want you to know something. The daughter I lost was a 7-year-old child. The woman I found is someone incredible. Someone who survived trauma and abandonment and still chose kindness. Someone who worked minimum wage jobs and still found ways to help others. Someone who carried a piece of love with her for 19 years, without even knowing what it meant." Khloe felt tears threatening again. "I spent so many nights wondering what my real family was like, whether they were looking for me, whether they even cared that I was gone. Every single day, every single night, there wasn't a moment when you weren't in my thoughts, when I wasn't hoping and praying and searching." Andrew's voice was steady now, certain. "And now I know why none of the leads ever panned out, why none of the age progression photos looked quite right. You were right here, in my own city, working in my own stores. You were never really lost. You were just hidden." They sat together on the edge of the bed, the restored blanket spread between them like a bridge between past and present. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the room in golden light that made the star pattern wallpaper seem to shimmer. "What happens now?" Khloe asked. "Now we take it one day at a time. We get to know each other again. We figure out what our relationship looks like when you're an adult with your own life and dreams." Andrew smiled. "And we find a way to honor what was stolen from us while building something new." Khloe picked up the restored blanket and held it against her chest. For the first time since she was 7 years old, she felt complete. Not because the blanket was whole again, but because she finally understood what it represented. Love that endures across time and distance, hope that refuses to die, and the truth that some bonds are so strong that nothing can truly break them. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like that very much." As if on cue, Andrew's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and smiled. "Detective Chen wants to meet with us tomorrow. Apparently Lewis Miller has been very talkative in custody. She thinks we might finally have all the answers." "Do we need them? The answers, I mean?" Andrew considered this. "Maybe not for us, but for closure, for justice, for other families who might be going through what we went through. Yes, I think we do." Khloe nodded. Understanding, the little girl who'd once written about making the world more fair had grown into a woman who still believed in justice, even when it was complicated. "Then let's finish this story properly," she said. "All of it." 3 months later, the corporate boardroom on the 40th floor of the Henderson building felt like a different world from the cramped employee break room at River Market. Khloe, who had legally reclaimed her identity as Elise Henderson, while choosing to keep Khloe as her professional name, sat at the mahogany conference table, studying quarterly reports with an intensity that reminded Andrew of her childhood notebook, filled with questions about the world. "The inventory management system needs a complete overhaul," she said, pointing to a spreadsheet that would have been incomprehensible to her just months ago. "We're losing money on spoilage because stores aren't tracking expiration dates properly, and the employee training program is practically non-existent." Andrew smiled as he watched his daughter dissect the business with fresh eyes. She'd insisted on starting from the ground up, spending her first month working in different stores throughout the chain, learning every aspect of operations from the perspective of the people who actually did the work. "What do you recommend?" asked Margaret Torres, the CFO, who had initially been skeptical about Andrew's decision to bring his newly found daughter into the business. "We start with the employees," Khloe said without hesitation. "Better training, better wages, better working conditions. Happy employees take better care of inventory, provide better customer service, and stay with the company longer. It's not rocket science. It's just treating people like human beings instead of replaceable parts." The room fell silent. In the 3 months since Khloe had officially joined Henderson Enterprises, she'd made similar observations that challenged decades of corporate thinking. But the preliminary results from the pilot programs she'd initiated were undeniable. Employee satisfaction was up, turnover was down, and customer complaints had decreased by 30%. "There's something else," Khloe continued, her voice taking on the tone Andrew recognized from their private conversations about justice and fairness. "I want to talk about River Market specifically." She stood and walked to the presentation screen, clicking to a slide that showed architectural plans. "I propose we transform it into something more than just a grocery store. We turn it into a community resource center. Still a fully functioning market, but also a place where families dealing with missing children can find support, resources, and hope." The slide changed to show a detailed layout. The main store floor would remain largely unchanged, but the back sections would house counseling offices, a resource library, meeting rooms for support groups, and a wall dedicated to missing children's photos and information. "We'd partner with law enforcement, social services, and missing children's organizations," she explained. "Provide free services to families, fund search efforts, and create a network of support that extends beyond just our local community." Margaret Torres leaned forward. "The financial impact will be minimal in the short term and profitable in the long run," Khloe interrupted gently. "We're not talking about charity. We're talking about community investment. The goodwill alone will drive customer loyalty, and the partnerships will provide tax benefits and grant opportunities." Andrew watched his daughter present her vision with growing pride. This was the fearless child who'd once wanted to discover all the whys in the world, now grown into a woman determined to fix what was broken. "The pilot program starts next month," he announced, surprising everyone in the room, including Khloe. "We'll use River Market as our test case." After the meeting, father and daughter walked through the nearly empty store that had been the site of their reunion. The investigators had long since finished their work. Louis Miller was serving his sentence for extortion and conspiracy, and the business was slowly returning to normal operations under new management. "You didn't have to approve the project," Khloe said as they stood in aisle 5, where broken glass and marinara sauce had once marked the moment their lives changed forever. "Yes, I did," Andrew replied. "It's exactly what this place needs, what we need." They'd spent countless hours here over the past months, working with architects and social workers to design a space that could serve multiple purposes. It was therapy for both of them, transforming the site of trauma into a place of healing. "Detective Chen called this morning," Andrew said. "The trial's been moved up. Louis Miller wants to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence." Khloe nodded. She'd been dreading the trial, not wanting to relive the details of Veronica Price's calculated cruelty, but she also understood the importance of seeing justice done. "What about the other information? The diary entries about other families? 3 cold cases have been reopened based on Veronica's records. It turns out she'd been stalking other wealthy families before settling on us. The FBI thinks there might be more victims." The weight of that revelation still felt crushing. Veronica's obsession with Andrew's family had led to a pattern of stalking and surveillance that could have destroyed other lives. But it also meant that Khloe's ordeal might help bring closure to other families who'd been living with unanswered questions. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if she'd just asked for help," Khloe said quietly. "If she'd told you about her mother's medical bills instead of stealing? I've thought about that too. I probably would have helped her. Should have been more aware of what my employees were going through." Andrew sighed. "But we can't change the past. We can only learn from it." They walked toward the front of the store, where contractors had already begun the renovations. The customer service desk was being expanded to include intake stations for families seeking help, and the walls were being reinforced to support the weight of the memorial board that would honor missing children. "Maria stopped by yesterday," Khloe said, referring to her former coworker from the deli counter. "She's going to be the new assistant manager. Good choice. She knows the community, knows the business, and she understands what we're trying to accomplish here. It had been Khloe's suggestion to promote from within whenever possible, to give opportunities to people who'd been overlooked by previous management. The results had been remarkable. Employees who'd been treated as disposable labor were now stepping up as leaders and innovators. As they reached the entrance, Andrew paused to look at the architectural rendering mounted near the door. The new river market would retain its neighborhood grocery store feel while adding elements that spoke to its larger mission. Comfortable seating areas where families could meet with counselors. A children's play area where kids could feel safe while their parents dealt with difficult conversations. And prominently displayed information about resources for families in crisis. "Your mother would be so proud," he said suddenly. Khloe looked at him in surprise. They'd talked about her mother sporadically over the past months, but the conversations were still difficult for Andrew. She always believed that tragedy could be transformed into purpose. He continued, "When she was sick, she made me promise that if anything happened to her, I'd find ways to help other families facing similar struggles. I thought I was doing that through financial donations and foundations. But this," he gestured toward the rendering, "this is what she meant. Personal investment, direct impact. I wish I could remember her more clearly. You have her heart, her sense of justice, her need to fix what's broken, her absolute refusal to give up on people." Andrew's voice was warm with memory. "The night before she died, she told me that love doesn't disappear when people do. It transforms, becomes part of who we are and how we move through the world." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the contractors work to transform a place of pain into something hopeful. In 6 months, the new river market would open its doors, not just as a grocery store, but as a beacon for families lost in the darkness of uncertainty. "Dad," Khloe said, using the title that still felt new and precious every time she spoke it. "Thank you for not giving up, for keeping my room exactly the same, for believing I'd come home someday." Andrew put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into the embrace she'd been missing for 19 years. "Thank you for never stopping being the brave, compassionate little girl I raised, even when you didn't remember being her." 6 months later, the morning of the grand opening dawned bright and clear, with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. Khloe stood in front of the newly transformed river market at 6 a.m., watching the final preparations unfold with a mixture of pride and nervous anticipation. The building looked nothing like the place where her world had shattered and reformed. Now it gleamed with fresh paint, new signage, and floor-to-ceiling windows that invited the community inside. Elise Market and Family Resource Center read the elegant lettering above the entrance, with smaller text below. Serving families, building hope, bringing loved ones home. Andrew joined her on the sidewalk, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing a smile that had become his default expression over the past months. The transformation in both of them was remarkable. He'd regained the warmth and optimism that grief had stolen, while she'd discovered a confidence she'd never known she possessed. "Ready for this?" he asked, handing her the coffee. "As ready as I'll ever be." Khloe gestured toward the growing crowd of media vans, community members and families who'd driven from across the Midwest to attend the opening. "I still can't believe how many people are here." The story of their reunion had captured national attention, but more importantly, it had resonated with families facing similar tragedies over the past month. They'd received hundreds of letters from parents of missing children, siblings searching for lost family members, and adults who'd grown up in foster care wondering about their origins. Mrs. Henderson, a young reporter, approached with a camera crew. "Could we get a quick interview before the ceremony begins?" Khloe nodded. Smoothing down the jacket of her navy blue suit, she'd chosen the outfit carefully, professional but approachable, with the original patch from her blanket sewn discreetly into the inside lining, a private talisman that remained close to her heart. "This project is clearly very personal to you," the reporter began. "What do you hope families will find here?" "Hope," Khloe answered without hesitation. "When someone you love goes missing, you feel completely powerless. There are resources available, but they're scattered, hard to navigate, and often overwhelmed. We wanted to create a one-stop center where families could find practical help, emotional support, and most importantly, a community of people who understand what they're going through. And what about your own experience? How has it shaped this project?" Khloe looked toward Andrew, who was speaking with Detective Chen near the entrance. My father never gave up searching for me, even when the trail went cold. That kind of love, that kind of determination. It saved my life in ways I'm still discovering. But not every family has the resources he had. We want to level the playing field, to make sure every missing person gets the attention and care they deserve. As the morning progressed, the crowd continued to grow. Khloe watched families arrive, some clutching photos of missing loved ones, others carrying signs with names and ages, all united by the terrible bond of uncertainty. She recognized the look in their eyes because she'd seen it in Andrew's face in old photographs from his searching years. At 10 a.m. sharp, the opening ceremony began. Mayor Patricia Williams spoke about community resilience. Detective Chen discussed the importance of public-private partnerships in solving cold cases, and Andrew delivered remarks about transforming personal tragedy into public service. But it was Khloe's speech that brought tears to the crowd's eyes. 6 months ago, I was just another employee in a grocery store, working paycheck to paycheck and wondering if I'd ever find where I belonged. She began, her voice carrying clearly across the parking lot. I had no idea that the answer to every question I'd ever asked about myself was standing 20 feet away, looking for the same thing I was. His family. She paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. Today, we're opening more than just a grocery store with some extra services. We're opening a place where the impossible becomes possible, where hope gets practical support, and where no family has to search alone. The ribbon cutting was ceremonial. A wide golden ribbon stretched across the entrance. With Andrew and Khloe holding the oversized scissors together, as the ribbon fell away, the crowd erupted in applause, and the doors opened to reveal the transformed interior. The main grocery section looked warm and welcoming, with wide aisles and good lighting that made shopping feel less like a chore and more like a community activity. But it was the resource center that drew the most attention. A beautifully designed space with comfortable seating areas, private meeting rooms, and the memorial wall that honored missing children with dignity and hope. Khloe watched a mother approach the memorial wall with a photo of her teenage son who'd vanished 3 years earlier. The woman traced his picture with gentle fingers before turning to speak with one of the volunteer counselors. It was exactly the kind of moment Khloe had envisioned when designing the space. A place where grief could be acknowledged without being overwhelming. Throughout the day, families toured the facility, met with resources coordinators, and connected with other families facing similar challenges. The grocery section stayed busy too, with community members eager to support the new mission through their everyday shopping. Around 4 p.m., as the crowds began to thin, Andrew found Khloe in the children's area. Reading to a group of kids whose parents were meeting with counselors, she'd insisted on including this space, remembering her own childhood need for comfort and distraction during difficult times. "How are you holding up?" he asked as she finished the story. "Good. Really good, actually." She stood and handed the book to one of the volunteers. "Did you see the Rodriguez family? They drove down from Milwaukee because they heard about what we're doing here." "I did. Maria's already connected them with our network up there. They won't have to travel for future meetings." They walked together toward the memorial wall, where fresh flowers had been placed throughout the day by visitors honoring their own missing loved ones. At the center of the display was a larger photo, not of a missing person, but of the ribbon-cutting ceremony, with a placard that read, "In memory of all the children still waiting to come home, and in honor of the parents who never stop searching. Your mother would be so proud," Andrew said, echoing the words he'd spoken months earlier, but with deeper meaning now. "I think she'd be proud of both of us," Khloe replied. "We took something terrible and found a way to make it matter." As the sun began to set, painting the parking lot in golden light, Khloe and Andrew stood together outside the entrance. The last visitors were leaving, volunteers were cleaning up, and the building was settling into the quiet rhythm it would maintain as both grocery store and sanctuary. "You know what the best part of today was?" Khloe asked. "What?" "Watching families realize they're not alone anymore. That feeling of isolation, of being the only people in the world dealing with this kind of pain. We broke that today." Andrew nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. His own years of searching had been marked by that terrible loneliness, the feeling that no one could possibly understand the specific agony of not knowing. "There's something I want to show you," he said, pulling out his phone. On the screen was a text message from Detective Chen. 2 more cold cases reopened based on information from today's event. The network is already working. Khloe felt tears sting her eyes, but they were good tears, tears of purpose fulfilled and hope realized. "You brought light back into my life, Elise," Andrew said, using the words that had become their private code for the love that had never died. "My heart never forgot your voice, Dad," she replied, completing the ritual that connected their past to their present. As they walked toward the car, Khloe looked back at the building one more time. In the growing darkness, the warm lights inside made it look like a beacon, which, she realized, was exactly what it was meant to be. Above the entrance, barely visible in the fading light, was the small plaque they'd unveiled at the end of the ceremony, dedicated to all the children still waiting to come home, and to the parents who never stopped searching. Love never disappears. It transforms. Some bonds, Khloe thought as they drove away, are woven from threads of gold that no amount of time or distance can ever truly break.